The black Mercedes Maybach turned onto Bourdion Road at 6:47 in the evening, and the man in the back seat had not blinked in 11 minutes. Collade Mensah was watching the street the way a person watches something they were not sure would still exist when they arrived. The jacaranda trees were taller. The road had been repaved. The compound walls were higher now, painted the same cream as he remembered but with new coils of wire along the top. Everything was the same. Everything was different. The driver, a man named James who had worked for Collade for 9 years and knew not to speak at threshold moments, kept his eyes forward as the car slowed at the gate. And then, Collade saw her. He said nothing. His hand, which had been resting flat against the leather armrest, curled slowly into a fist. James noticed in the rearview mirror the way a trained man notices. He said nothing either. Because the woman kneeling at the gate of Collade Mensah's compound, the woman with her hands pressed together and her lips moving in something that was either prayer or a name, was a woman who, 10 years ago, had been the reason Collade left Nigeria entirely and swore he would never come back. Her name was Ngozi Aduke. She was 54 years old, and she weighed 47 kilograms, which was less than her daughter had weighed at 17. She wore a blue wrapper skirt that had been washed so many times the pattern had gone from royal to pale, and a white blouse that was clean. She had stood at the tap behind the market stalls at 5:30 that morning and washed it by hand and wrung it out and held it in the sunlight until it dried. She wore no shoes. Her feet were bare against the concrete apron outside the gate. In her right hand she held a small item wrapped in a piece of cloth, the color of dried palm wine. The wrapping was so old and careful that a person watching might think it contained something alive. In her left hand, she held a piece of paper folded into thirds. The paper had been folded and unfolded so many times that the creases had gone soft, the way skin goes soft at a joint from years of bending. She had been kneeling there since 4:15 in the afternoon. 2 hours and 32 minutes. A gateman named Solomon, who had worked at the compound since the previous owner, had told her 3 times that no one was home. She had thanked him each time and remained where she was. Ngozi had worked as a seamstress in Onitsha Main Market for 26 years. Not a trader, a seamstress. The distinction mattered to her in the way small distinctions matter to people who have had everything else taken. She had a machine, a second-hand Singer she had bought piece by piece from a parts seller in 1997, and she had a gift that had nothing to do with the machine. She could look at a person once, just once, and know exactly what cut of fabric would make them look most like themselves. Not their best self, their true self. Customers said Ngozi's work made you look like you'd always been that person, like you'd been waiting your whole life to put on the right cloth. She charged 2,800 naira for a simple dress, 4,500 for an agbada, and she had never once raised her prices without first sitting with the customer and explaining why. In 26 years she had made clothes for market traders and lawyers, for a deputy governor's wife, and for a woman who swept floors at the bus terminal. She did not distinguish between them with her hands. Only with the cloth she recommended, which was always honest about what the customer could afford. She had one child, a daughter named Chidinma, who had her mother's hands and her father's silence. Chidinma had grown up in a 1-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a building on Enugu Road, with mold on the eastern wall and a window that looked out onto another building's wall. She had studied by the light of a kerosene lantern until age 13, when her mother saved enough to buy a reading lamp. She had never owned a school bag that was new. She had never once, in her mother's memory, complained about this. She carried her books in a white plastic bag with the name of a rice brand on it, walking 2 kilometers each way because the bus fare was money her mother needed to eat. At 17, Chidinma won a national mathematics competition and was offered a full scholarship to study engineering at a university in Abuja. Ngozi had sewn herself a new dress for the ceremony, the first new dress she had made for herself in 11 years. It was green, the color of new palm leaves, and she had lined the inside of the collar with a piece of yellow cloth from a wrapper her own mother had given her on the day she married. She wore it to the school hall and sat in the front row and cried without making any sound at all, the way certain women cry when joy arrives after it has been too long coming. The university in Abuja was where Chidinma met Kolade Mensah's son. His name was Tobena. He was 23. He drove a white Lexus SUV with a spoiler that had been added after the fact and an audio system that announced his arrival on any quiet street. He was studying business administration with the understanding that studying was a formality between him and the inheritance. He saw Chidinma in the university library at 2:15 p.m. on a Thursday in October and spent the next 4 months finding new reasons to be in the library until she agreed to have lunch with him. She told him about Onitsha, about the reading lamp and the plastic bag. He found everything she said fascinating in the way that people find things fascinating when those things have never happened to them. He told her she was brilliant. She was. She told him her mother had made that possible. He said all the right things about that too. They were together for 2 years. What happened in those 2 years was not a single event. It was a series of events that Ngozi learned about piece by piece. The way you learn a building has been condemned. First a crack, then a structural report, then the notice on the door. Tobena had borrowed money from Chidinma, small amounts at first, with explanations. Then larger amounts, with promises. Then her scholarship housing fees, which she had covered with money Ngozi sent from Onitsha, money Ngozi had made by sewing from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. for 4 months, without rest. The total, by the end, was 380,000 naira. And then there was the other matter, which Ngozi did not learn until Chidinma called her on a Wednesday afternoon and spoke for 6 minutes in a voice so flat that Ngozi held the phone away from her ear and pressed it back and held it away again. Tobena's family had found out about Chidinma. His father, Kolade Mensah, who by that point had built the 4th largest logistics company in West Africa, had sent a man in a Navy car to the university. The man had given Chidinma an envelope. Inside the envelope was a single page with 2 things on it, a figure written in numbers and a line for a signature. The figure was 200,000 naira. The instruction was simple. Take the money and end the relationship, or receive nothing and be removed from university accommodation, which, it had been arranged, would happen regardless of whether she signed. She signed. She took 180,000 naira of the money and sent it to her mother to repay the scholarship fees. She kept 20,000 and used it for transport to a room she found 2 kilometers from campus. She never told Ngozi about the envelope. Ngozi found out 18 months later from a woman who sold beans at the market stall next to hers and had a cousin who worked in university administration. The week Ngozi found out, she did not eat. Not from grief. She had grieved many things in her life, and grief had never closed her throat. She did not eat because she was calculating. She was sitting with the figure of 200,000 naira and the figure of what it would cost to file a complaint with the university board, and the figure of what it would cost to hire a lawyer, and the figure of what she had in her account. The account had 7,400 naira. She could not eat because every time she raised food to her mouth, her brain returned to the calculation, and she would set the food down and begin again. On the 5th day, she ate a boiled egg standing up at the window. Then she went back to her machine. Kolade Mensah left Nigeria for London 8 months after the envelope. The logistics company had expanded. There was a board, a managing director, a legal team. He flew business class and took an apartment in Canary Wharf and called his son twice a week. He did not think about the envelope. Not because he was a cruel man. He would have said he was not a cruel man, and there were people who would have agreed, but because the envelope was not something he had done. The envelope was something he had instructed to be done, which felt, to a man of his particular formation, like a different category of action entirely. Chidinma graduated. She found work in Port Harcourt with an engineering firm that paid her 85,000 naira a month. She sent 30,000 to her mother every month for 3 years, then 40,000 when she was promoted. She called Ngozi every evening at 8 p.m. On those calls she spoke about work, about her colleagues, about a restaurant near her office that made pepper soup in a clay pot the way Ngozi used to make it on Sundays. She never spoke about Tobena. Ngozi never asked. Some things between a mother and a daughter are maintained through the precise placement of silence. There is a particular cruelty in bureaucratic kindness. For 3 years after Chidinma's graduation, Ngozi had tried the proper channels. She had filed a complaint with the university's student welfare office. This was 9 months after she learned about the envelope. Once she had the name of the man who had delivered it, which she had gotten from a clerk who remembered the car. The welfare officer, a thin man named Mr. Adesanya, who wore a lanyard with his name printed twice, had listened politely for 11 minutes, and then explained, also politely, that the university could not adjudicate matters occurring between private individuals outside of the institutional framework. Ngozi had asked what that meant. He had explained what it meant. She had asked what she should do. He had suggested she consult a legal practitioner. She had asked whether the university kept records of accommodation reassignments that occurred at the instruction of donors. He had looked at his hands. She had stood, thanked him by name, and left. Outside the office there was a wooden bench, and she sat on it for 8 minutes before she stood again and walked to the bus terminal. The lawyer she found worked from a one-room office on Aba Road in Onitsha. He was 44 and wore a suit jacket with a different colored shirt every day, and he told her the truth, which was that what had been done was wrong, and what she could prove was limited, and what it would cost to pursue was more than she had. He did not charge her for the consultation. When she left, he wrote something in his notebook that she did not see: the date, the name Mensah, and the figure 200,000 naira. He kept the notebook. He did not know what he would do with it. Some lawyers are like that. They write things down because they believe, without evidence, that things written down eventually matter. 14 months ago, on a Tuesday, Chidinma called at 6:30 p.m. instead of 8. Ngozi was at her machine. She answered on the second ring. Chidinma spoke for 4 minutes. Then she stopped, and there was nothing on the line for a moment. And then Ngozi said, quietly, "Which hospital?" Chidinma had been driving back from a site inspection on the Port Harcourt Expressway. The other car came from the right, from a junction with a traffic light that had not worked in 11 months. The driver of the other car was 22 years old. Chidinma was 28. She survived. The survival was the word the doctors used. What they meant was, she was alive, and her spine had been damaged at the level the medical team referred to as L1, L2. And she would need a surgical procedure that was available at 2 hospitals in Nigeria. Korle-Bu in Accra would have been better. But the distance and the procedure at the better of the 2 Nigerian hospitals would cost 4.7 million naira. Ngozi sold the singer first because it was the largest thing. A man came with a cart on a Saturday morning and carried it down the 4 flights on the Enugu Road building and paid her 45,000 naira, which was less than a third of what she had paid for its parts piece by piece over 6 years. But she had calculated this and accepted it before he arrived. She sold the reading lamp to the neighbor's daughter for 3,500 naira. She sold the green dress to a woman at the market who looked at it a long time before buying it, which Ngozi did not mind, because a person should look at a thing before buying it, especially a thing that was made by someone's hands for a specific joy. She had 7 friends who each gave what they could, and the total was 118,000 naira. She took a loan from a cooperative at 22% interest and received 250,000. She took a loan from her landlord and received 75,000. She applied to 3 charitable organizations by letter, not email. She did not have a phone that managed email well, and mailed each letter with her own stamps. 2 did not respond. 1 sent a letter of encouragement and 15,000 naira. She thanked them in a letter that took her 40 minutes to write, because she wanted it to be a letter they would keep. For a time in the 4th week, she believed the state government would help. There was a program. She had read about it on a poster at the health clinic, a program for catastrophic medical expenses for indigent residents of the state. She went to the office at 7:30 in the morning, because she had learned from experience that offices opened earlier for people who arrived before they were ready to be refused. A man at a desk gave her a form. The form asked for 17 pieces of documentation. She had 11 of them. She spent 6 days gathering 4 more. The 17th piece was a valuation document for property owned, signed by a licensed assessor. She did not own property. She explained this to the man at the desk on her 3rd visit. He looked at the form. He said the form required it. She asked what a person without property should do. He said he would make a note and pass the file to a supervisor. She thanked him by name. The name was on a small card taped to the front of his desk, and left. She waited 2 weeks. Nothing came. She went back once more. The man at the desk was different. The file had not been passed to a supervisor. It had been set in a tray that had filled up around it. She looked at the tray and she looked at the form, and she took her 11 documents and placed them back in her envelope and walked out into the heat of the street, where a woman was selling chin-chin from a yellow basin, and the smell of groundnut oil and sugar settled around Ngozi like something from another life. By the end of 3 months, she had 623,000 naira. She needed 4.7 million. The surgery could not wait indefinitely. The surgical team had given her a window of 5 months, possibly less, before the damage to the spinal column would become irreversible in a way that even a successful procedure could not address. She sat with the number 623,000 on one side and 4,700,000 on the other, and she did not cry. She had long since moved past the place where a number could make her cry. What it could do was make her still. She would sit very still with the number until the stillness told her something. It was at this point, 3 weeks before the window the surgical team had given her began to close, that a woman from her church, a woman named Pauline, who was 71 years old and kept information the way certain trees keep water, said to Ngozi one Sunday after service, "The Mensa compound is back open. The man is returning from London next week." My nephew drove one of the vehicles. Ngozi said nothing. Pauline looked at her. "I know what they did," Pauline said. "The whole of Onitsha knows what they did." Ngozi folded her hands in her lap. "Thank you, Pauline," she said. She went home. She sat with this new information for 4 days. Then on the 5th day she washed her blouse, wrapped the measuring tape and the photograph in the cloth, folded the hospital's surgical estimate into thirds, and took a bus to Lagos. If this story is settling into you the way I think it is, subscribe now, because what happens in the next few minutes is the part that Collade Mensah had been running from for 10 years without knowing it was following him home. The car stopped. James opened the gate with the electronic fob. The Maybach rolled slowly into the compound, and Ngozi did not look up as the car passed. She did not call out. She continued to kneel, with her hands together and her lips moving. Solomon, who had watched all of this from the gatehouse door, watched Collade step out of the car. He watched the man stand still for a moment. He watched him look at the woman. Then he heard Collade say, quietly in the way of a man whose voice has not changed its pitch but whose meaning has changed entirely, "Bring her inside." The sitting room was air-conditioned to 22 degrees, and Ngosi's bare feet were cold against the tile. Collade sat across from her in a chair the color of dark honey. Between them was a glass coffee table. He had sent for water, and it came in a crystal glass with ice. Ngozi looked at the glass and did not touch it. She placed the cloth-wrapped item on the table, and then the folded paper beside it. "My name is Ngozi Eduke," she said. "I am Chidinma's mother." Collade did not move. A muscle in his jaw tightened and released. "I did not come to accuse you," she said. "I came because my daughter is in a hospital bed, and I have tried every other door." She unfolded the paper on the table without looking at it. "The surgery costs 4.7 million naira. I have 623,000. I am asking you to close the gap." She stopped. She did not add anything. She did not explain the justice of it, or the injustice of it, or what he owed, or what she deserved. She simply stopped, the way a person stops who has practiced saying a thing so many times that there is nothing left to add. Collade looked at the paper. He looked at the cloth-wrapped item. "What is that?" he said. Ngozi unwrapped it. Inside was a measuring tape, an old one, the numbers worn down on one side from decades of use, and beneath the measuring tape, a small photograph. The photograph was of Chidinma at 17, in the green dress, standing beside Ngozi in the school hall. They were both looking at the camera but not smiling, the way people look at cameras when they are too moved to perform the expression that cameras expect. He looked at the photograph for a long time. Ngozi watched his face the way a seamstress watches cloth, not for what it shows, but for what it is about to do. Then he said something she did not expect. He said, "I have a photograph too." He stood up and left the room. He was gone 4 minutes. When he returned, he was holding an envelope, and his face had changed in the way that faces change when a person has gone to get something, and in retrieving it, has remembered what retrieving it means. He placed the envelope on the table. "Tobena showed me this 2 years ago," he said. "After Port Harcourt." Inside the envelope was a printout of an email from Chidinma to Tobena from 9 years ago, before the envelope and after it, long and specific, and without bitterness. The email had done one thing, which was to tell the truth. "She could have used this," Collade said. "She never used it." He looked at the measuring tape on the table. Then he looked at Ngozi's bare feet on the cold tile, and he did something that a man of his particular formation should not have been able to do. He looked away. Not from shame, but from understanding, which is a different thing, and harder. "The surgery," he said. "What hospital?" "The surgery took place at National Orthopedic Hospital in Lagos, in a suite that Collade arranged within 72 hours. The surgical team was led by a woman who had trained at Charité in Berlin for 6 years and returned to Lagos because she had decided, at 37, that she was done treating the problems of countries that were not hers. The procedure lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. Chidinma woke at 6:20 in the evening to find her mother sitting beside the bed with her hands in her lap and her lips moving. Not in prayer this time, but in counting. She was counting the machines. The way she counted her way through difficult things, naming each one quietly, so the room would feel smaller than it was. When Chidinma opened her eyes, Ngozi stopped counting. She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Your feet are going to work," which was not a question. Kolade Mensah did not come to the hospital. He had arranged everything through his PA and paid everything through his solicitor, and this was both the limit and the beginning of what he was capable of. What he did do, on the third week of Chidinma's recovery, was call the registrar of the university and request that a formal record be expunged, not quietly, not as a favor, but through a written process he completed himself and signed. He then called his son. That conversation lasted 47 minutes. He had never spoken to his son for 47 consecutive minutes about a single subject. The call ended without resolution. That was appropriate, because certain things cannot be resolved, they can only be begun. Ngozi went back to Onitsha. She did not have the singer. A woman in her church had heard the story, the way stories travel in communities where people pay attention to each other, and had donated a machine, a newer model, with a stitch selector and a light above the presser foot. Ngozi sat at it for a long time before she turned it on. She ran her hand over the top plate, which was smooth and had no scratches yet, no history yet. Then she threaded it. And she began. There is a thing that people do not understand about a woman like Ngozi Eduki. They see the bare feet and the worn wrapper, and they calculate the distance between where she is and where they think a person should be, and from that distance they draw a conclusion about what she has and has not done with her life. The calculation is wrong. It has always been wrong. A woman who raises a daughter on kerosene light and a plastic bag and gets her to Abuja with her mathematics intact has not failed at anything. A woman who stands at someone else's gate at 4:15 in the afternoon with her blouse washed and her hands pressed together and says what she needs to say without adding anything unnecessary has not surrendered to anything. What she has done is the opposite of surrender. She has shown up, every time, with everything she still had. You cannot close a door on something like that. You can try. Kolade Mensah tried for 10 years. He put a continent between himself and the door he had told a man in a Navy car to close. But the truth of what we leave behind does not stay where we leave it. It travels. It kneels at our gate. It sets a measuring tape on our glass table and waits for us to recognize what we are looking at. Some things cannot be taken by envelopes. They cannot be reduced by figures written in ink. The hands that taught a daughter to carry her books in a plastic bag without shame raised a woman who, when she had the chance to use the truth as a weapon, put it in an email and addressed it to the only person who could learn from it. That email traveled 9 years across a glass table, and it did the thing that silence sometimes cannot. It opened something. Not wide, not cleanly, just enough. If someone closed a door on you, or on someone you love, and then one day found themselves on the other side of a door you were keeping, would you open it not to be good, not for what you would receive? Would you open it because you have decided that you are the kind of person who does not carry closed doors with them? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and this question is one I have been sitting with since long before this story. Subscribe for more stories about the people the world walks past, the hands that hold more than anyone could see, and the quiet power that does not announce itself until it changes everything. I'll see you in the next one.